Most Christians assume that all worship directed at God is received by God, that as long as you are singing to Him, praying to Him, or lifting your hands toward Him, He is pleased. But the Bible tells a very different story. Malachi 1:10 records God saying something about the worship of His own people that should stop every worshiper alive today. "Oh, that there were one among you who would shut the doors, that you might not kindle fire on my altar in vain. I have no pleasure in you, says the Lord of hosts, and I will not accept an offering from your hand." Shut the doors. God told His own people He would rather they close the church than continue worshiping Him the way they were worshiping Him. He did not want better worship, He wanted the bad worship to stop. Today, we are going to look at 6 types of worship God says He absolutely rejects, so that you can make sure yours is not one of them. The first type of worship God absolutely rejects is worship offered by someone who is living in deliberate, unconfessed, unrepentant sin, who walks into God's presence on Sunday carrying the same sin they refuse to deal with on Saturday. Isaiah 1:15 records God's response to this type of worship with a bluntness that leaves no room for comfortable theology. "When you spread out your hands, I will hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood." I will hide my eyes. I will not listen. The worshiper is raising their hands. God is hiding His face. The prayers are being spoken. God is not receiving them. And the reason is not that the worship form is wrong. It is that the hands being raised are full of something the worshiper refuses to put down. Psalm 66:18 confirms this principle in a single devastating verse. "If I had cherished iniquity in my heart, the Lord would not have listened." Cherished, held on to, protected, refused to release. The person who cherishes sin while worshiping God is asking Him to accept an offering from hands that are holding something He hates, and God will not participate in that contradiction. Matthew 5:23-24 gives the practical instruction that resolves this. "If you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled." Leave the gift, deal with the sin first, then come back. The worship will still be there, but it will only be received after the heart has been cleaned. You cannot raise clean hands to God while holding dirty sin in them. He sees both, and He will not accept the worship while the sin remains in the grip. The second type of worship God absolutely rejects is the worship that sounds right, but is completely disconnected from how the worshiper actually lives. The mouth says the right words, the voice sings the right songs, and the life behind the mouth has no resemblance to the lyrics coming out of it. Isaiah 29:13 records God identifying this exact type. "This people draw near with their mouth and honor me with their lips, while their hearts are far from me, and their fear of me is a commandment taught by men." Hearts far from me. The worship was technically correct, the words were accurate, the melody was acceptable, and the heart producing it was somewhere else entirely, far from God, disconnected from the truth being sung, present in the room but absent from the encounter. Jesus quoted this exact verse in Matthew 15:8-9 and added something devastating. "In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men." In vain. That word should terrify every autopilot worshiper who has ever gone through the motions without engaging the heart. Vain means empty, producing nothing, accomplishing nothing, received by no one. You can sing for an hour and have it count for nothing in heaven. You can raise your hands for an entire service and have God receive none of it, because God is not listening to your voice, He is listening to your heart, and when the two are not saying the same thing, He responds to the heart, not the performance. Your mouth can worship God for an hour while your heart is not in the room. God hears both, and He responds to the one you cannot fake. The third type of worship God absolutely rejects is the worship that costs the worshiper nothing. The leftover offering, the convenient sacrifice, the worship that is given only from the surplus and never from the substance. Malachi 1:8 exposes this type with a question God asks through the prophet. When you offer blind animals in sacrifice, is that not evil? And when you offer those that are lame or sick, is that not evil? Present that to your governor. Would he accept you or show you favor? Present that to your governor. God is saying you would never give your boss the leftovers. You would never offer your employer the damaged, the broken, the things you were going to throw away anyway. But you bring them to me and call it worship. 2 Samuel 24:24 records David establishing the principle that should govern every act of worship for every believer permanently. I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God that cost me nothing. That cost me nothing. David understood that worship without cost is not worship, it is disposal. It is getting rid of what you did not want and calling the disposal an offering. God is not a second-hand store for your spiritual leftovers. He is the King of Kings, and the worship He accepts is the worship that costs the worshiper something real. Time that was valuable, money that was needed, comfort that was genuine, praise that was offered when circumstances made it difficult. That is worship. Everything else is just giving God what you were finished with. If your worship has never cost you anything, it has never been worship. It has been convenient. And God can tell the difference between a sacrifice and a leftover. The fourth type of worship God absolutely rejects is worship performed for the approval of people rather than the pleasure of God. Matthew 6:5 records Jesus addressing this type directly. And when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, that they may be seen by others. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. They have received their reward. The applause of people, the reputation of being spiritual, the image of deep devotion, that was what they were worshiping for, and that is exactly what they got, and nothing more. The reward from God was forfeited the moment the worship was redirected toward a human audience. Colossians 3:23 gives the standard that exposes audience-driven worship. Whatever you do, work heartily, as for the Lord, and not for men. As for the Lord, not for the congregation watching, not for the person beside you who might be impressed by your raised hands, not for the social media post that documents your devotion. For the Lord, the only audience whose opinion determines whether the worship was received or wasted. The person who worships loudly in public and never worships privately has already revealed who their worship is actually for, because private worship has no audience, and if the worship only happens when someone is watching, it was never directed at God in the first place. If you only worship when someone is watching, your audience was never God. He was just the excuse. The real audience was the room. The fifth type of worship God absolutely rejects is the worship offered by someone who substitutes the act of worship for the life of obedience that God actually requires. This is the person who sings passionately on Sunday about surrendering everything to Jesus and has not obeyed a single thing He said since last Sunday. They worship as a replacement for obedience rather than an expression of it. 1 Samuel 15:22 gives God's verdict in this substitution in a verse that should be posted on every church stage in the world. Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. To obey is better than sacrifice. Obedience outranks worship every time. Amos 5:21-24 records God rejecting the entire worship system of Israel, their feasts, their assemblies, their songs, their offerings, all of it with replacing a single demand. but let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Justice, righteousness, not better music, not louder singing, not more passionate worship sets. Justice and righteousness, the practical, daily, lived-out obedience to what God actually commanded. The worshiper who sings about justice on Sunday and practices injustice on Monday has offered God a worship he does not want, because he never asked for the song, he asked for the life. God never said, "Sing about justice." He said, "Let justice roll down." The song was supposed to be the overflow of the life, not the replacement for it.
The sixth type of worship God absolutely rejects is worship that has been mixed with the values, the standards, and the spirit of the world. Worship that tries to serve God while adopting the methods, the priorities, and the atmosphere of the culture it was supposed to be set apart from. Ezekiel 23:38-39 records God's fury at worship that was contaminated by pagan influence. They have defiled my sanctuary and profaned my Sabbaths, for when they had slaughtered their children and sacrificed to their idols, on the same day they came into my sanctuary to profane it. On the same day, they worshipped the world's gods and then walked into God's house as though nothing had happened. The contamination was not separate from the worship, it was brought into the worship. 2 Corinthians 6:14-17 gives the New Testament standard that addresses this contamination directly. What partnership has righteousness with lawlessness, or what fellowship has light with darkness? Therefore go out from their midst and be separate from them, says the Lord. Separate. The worship that God receives is worship that has not been diluted with the world's entertainment values, the world's celebrity culture, the world's marketing tactics, or the world's definition of success. When the church adopts the world's methods to attract the world's attention, the worship that results is not pure. It is mixed, and God has never accepted a mixture. He has always demanded separation. Not because he hates culture, but because worship that looks identical to the world it is supposed to be transforming has lost the very thing that made it worship in the first place. When the church copies the world to attract the world, the worship becomes the world, and the God who demanded separation will not accept what has been mixed. Here is what I want you to carry out of this video today. God is not against worship. He created it, he desires it, he inhabits the praises of his people, but he is deeply, specifically, and immovably against worship that contradicts his character, dishonors his holiness, or treats his presence as something that can be accessed on human terms rather than on his. The worship he rejects is not rejected because he is impossible to please. It is rejected because he is worthy of something real, and what he is receiving from many of his people right now is not real. It is convenient, it is performative, it is contaminated, it is disconnected from the life that is supposed to produce it. John 4:23 gives the promise that makes this teaching not a condemnation, but an invitation. The hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. The Father is seeking, he is actively looking for true worshipers, people whose worship is genuine, costly, private before it is public, connected to obedience, and unmixed with the world. He is seeking them. That means they are rare, and that means becoming one is not the default, it is a choice. Make that choice today. Bring God the worship that costs you something. Worship with a clean heart. Worship with a life that matches the lyrics. Worship for an audience of one, and the God who shut the doors on false worship will throw them wide open for the real thing. Subscribe to Faith Ablaze Network right now and hit that notification bell. We release teachings like this one every single week. Share this video with every worshiper in your life, because the people who worship God most sincerely are the ones who most need to know whether their worship is being received. And leave a comment below. Tell me honestly which of these 6 types challenged you the most today. God bless you, and I will see you in the next message.